Welcome again to the 2026 Next Systems Studies speaker series. And we are joined today by Nairuti Shastry from the Center for Economic Democracy, who will be telling us about community wealth building and some of the strategies to relocate the economy in places and for the benefit of people and climate and for the overall well-being, and use these strategies to combat the accumulation and inequality that have characterized our current system. This project is run by Next System Studies at George Mason University. I'll drop some links to share more about Next System Studies and the Next System movement. My name is Dr. Eleanor Finley. I am an anthropologist. I have a PhD from UMass Amherst. And this semester, I've had the privilege of working with the Next System Fellows at George Mason. And I'm going to hand it over to Nairuti here in just a moment. Thank you all for being here.
Okay, I'm assuming people can see me now. Thanks, Eleanor, for the introduction, and I'm really happy to be here again at George Mason at the Fuse campus, joined by several of our students. Because it's a small crew inside, I might rotate between sitting and standing because otherwise it's just awkward. So I wanted to, by way of introduction, share a little bit about myself and then really hear about each of you and the kind of the projects that you're working on. And then for the folks online, just as an FYI, we're going to be going through the presentation and engaging with the students here, and then there will be time for Q&A. So we'll defer to the students during the Q&A first, and then we'll answer questions that are coming in from online. So yeah, as Eleanor mentioned, I'm Nairuti. I use she, her pronouns, and I serve as the Director of Policy and Research at an org called the Center for Economic Democracy. I feel like I know most people here, but if we want to do a quick round of introductions, and if you want to share your name, your pronouns, if you choose to share them, and then kind of what specific project or interest kind of brought you to the Next Systems fellowship program. Do you mind if we start with you?
Yeah, sure. My name is Rima. I'm a junior undergrad student. I major in politics and international politics and government. What got me into the Next Systems was actually a social movements and political protest class that I took with Professor Benjamin last semester. And I was really interested in constitutionalism and constitutional implications, and so it came into it like that.
Well, it's nice to meet you, Rima, and I imagine talking about constitutionalism is quite relevant these days. I know we've met before, but please reintroduce yourself.
I am Bella. I am in grad school right now for public policy. It's my first semester. I also joined this class, or joined the fellowship because of Ben Mancey's class. I was never really into I never thought that I wanted to go into anything sociology. Sorry if I was wrong. Sociological. But because I thought I wanted to do something in police work, and I was in criminology at first, and I ended up turning kind of everything around when I took Ben Mancey's class and wanted to focus not only on the politics, but because I'm in public policy now, but I want to also embed sociological methodologies into what I'm doing, because I feel like that will make a better society, and hopefully go into law. I really would want to represent immigrants, because that's something that means a lot to me. But besides that, yeah, I'm an intern at DeNova right now, looking into childcare cooperatives, and we actually have some meetings with some cooperative leaders this week, so I'm really excited about that. But yeah, thank you very much. Yeah. Nice to meet everyone.
Thanks, Bella, for the introduction. And for context, Bella works with DeNova, which stands for Democratizing Northern Virginia. Eleanor, if you can share a link about DeNova in the chat, that would be great. But it's sort of a place-based regional project to democratize both our regional economic system, and George Mason is supporting that initiative. Yeah, go ahead.
Hi everyone, my name is Fabian Palacios. This is my last year of the master's degree in sociology. I'm graduating this semester.
So,
I was also invited by Mansky to join the fellowship program for this semester. Right now, I am conducting research on how Latina immigrant women make sense of their participation in worker co-ops. I'm currently working with two co-ops. One is Mujeres Manos a la Obra, that was incubated by Secosol. I want to thank Jeff. And the other one is a Magic Room, whose members also are part of Secosol. So I'm very
that's excellent. Nice to meet you, Fabian. I think we might have met once or twice at an event,
so, yeah.
but it's good to see you again. Yeah.
Yeah, my name is Melik. I use he, him pronouns. I got into the Next Systems Fellowship Program after like spending multiple years in community organizing and student organizing efforts. I was also recruited by Ben Mansky. He really pushed me in the program.
Shout out to you, Ben. I think he's on the call.
No, Ben was like very, you should do this, you should do this. Have you submitted your application? But yeah, I currently work with the Movement Engaged Hub at George Mason with Professor John Dale on a project called The Rights of Nature. And we're focused on advocating against the rapid spinner data centers throughout the Nova area and the impact on the environment. So
very cool. Yeah, the data center conversation is a big one. For folks who are not in Virginia presently, I imagine that folks in the Midwest and also some states in the South are also struggling with data centers and the kind of offloading of cost to consumers and all sorts of other environmental concerns. And yeah, would love for you to bring up that perspective when we're talking about community wealth building.
I unfortunately have to leave in like the next 10 minutes, but would definitely love to connect.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
All right, next.
Hi everyone, my name is Abby. We met. I'm currently a sociology major at George Mason. My primary interests, stem from connecting people to education and resources, as well as building community. And that kind of stemmed from my anecdotal experiences coming from South Africa, where there was a broad community there and it was accessible. And I felt that disconnect when I moved to the United States. And secondly, prior to becoming a student, I was working in the hospitality industry, but I had a huge passion for working in social justice. But I found that there was a big barrier to entry despite all the information that exists. And now as a college student, I find myself in these spaces. So primarily I would like to focus on how to connect education and people who aren't as privileged as we are sitting right here. I'm currently working at CED for my internship. I'm working on my favorite project right now is working on this impact study where we're studying people, the impacts of participatory budgeting on a wide range of people and its effects on institutions, people, and democratic practices. So yeah, that's what about me.
Awesome. Thank you. Yes, Abby is our intern at CED. Spoiler. We absolutely adore her and love working with her, and she's gotten such good feedback from many of our partner organizations as well. And yeah, I'm sure you'll bring in all sorts of context today based on the projects you're working on. Jeff, do you want to give a quick intro since you're here?
I did.
Okay.
Oh, just a break. Come on.
I'm a computer science teacher who hates computers. So when I heard what was happening, I misunderstood and I came here in person. But I just,
Yeah.
Jeff is always welcome. We work together closely.
Yeah.
You're always welcome.
Yes, and Jeff is also a part of the DNOVA Council with me and a very active member of our growing solidarity economy ecosystem here in Northern Virginia. All right, well, now that we've got intros out of the way, I'm gonna just start with something a little bit basic. What is economy? So I want just for a second, I know these are smart students, both undergrad and graduate, but I want you to put aside all the theoretical knowledge for a second. And just, yeah, when you think about the term economy, what does that evoke? What comes up? No wrong answers.
In a very basic sense, it's
Yeah,
just
anything
What pops to mind?
yeah.
basic sense is that the exchange of goods and services to meet the people's needs.
Yeah, absolutely. So I hear exchange, right, of both goods and services and meeting people's needs. I imagine you're thinking about housing, food, any other needs that you want to highlight?
Thinking of basic needs and
Okay.
needs.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. Anyone else? Other thoughts about economy?
Thinking about access to community and community access as well, which kind of ties back into like basic needs too, because like I think also in like the context of like housing, like having secure housing gives you access to the rest of society, whereas like having unstable or not being housed or being homeless can be a social group of sorts. So
Yeah, absolutely. So this piece that Fabian mentioned around exchange is not necessarily a neutral process, right? I know we've got some sociologists in the room. So the piece around access and inclusion and whether or not that's an equitable process of exchange and who's able to kind of participate does shape our economy. Excellent. So when the kind of bare bones definition I want to introduce or perhaps reintroduce to y'all comes from our movement partners over at Movement Generation. And they really, look at economy from a linguistic perspective at when these three Greek roots, eco, oikos, and nomos, and essentially present that it really just means the management of our collective home. Come on in. The management of our collective home. When you hear that, what does that evoke to you? Does it feel like, oh yeah, that's how I experience economy, is the management of our collective home, or does something else come up? Curious to hear some reflections.
I think when I think of the economy, I think about, that the economy only runs by people, but the economy is treated as if it's above people and separate. It's not.
Yeah, absolutely. That kind of distinction is something that sociologist Fred Block actually talks a lot about, is like the illusion of economy or the illusion of capitalism, where it's like, oh, the markets are over here doing their own thing, and then people are over here doing their own thing. But actually, it is kind of one and the same. And this idea of management, right, to your point earlier, can happen in a lot of different ways. So if you were to characterize the management of our economy today in 2026, what would you say? What are some adjectives you might use to describe our current economic system?
unbalanced and abusive are the main things that are coming to mind.
Unbalanced, abusive,
Exploitative.
exploitative. I'm seeing accumulative in the chat from Michelle. Thank you. Our managers are inept. Okay. Got some individual responsibility that we want to talk about. Absolutely. Undemocratic. Others in the room?
Depersonal,
Depersonal. Say more.
or impersonal, maybe that's the right word, it's
Mhm.
impersonal.
How do you see that manifest?
If you lose your job to AI ostensibly, or you're caught up in layoffs, it's not really seen as something that you're not prioritized. The person isn't prioritized in that process. It's just seen as something that is a necessity because of systems.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is the person, we're not necessarily thinking about humanity in so much as like the input of human labor into a broader system. Does that sound?
I think so. Yeah,
Okay.
we're not thinking about people as
Yeah.
valuable in that system or
Yeah.
inherently valuable in that system.
For sure. Yeah, so if you look at the graphic on the screen here, again, borrowing from our friends at Movement Generation, as well as Climate Justice Alliance and the Indigenous Environmental Network, or IEN, here's what our current economy looks like. So we consider our current economy to be extractive. I see April in the chat has put that in. Violent, absolutely. And so when you think about, what's the world view, some of what Eleanor shared could be related to this idea of consumerism, a colonial mindset. All of those things do relate to this sort of impersonal kind of experience of our economic system. The piece around violence can be echoed in this piece around governance, where it's very militaristic. Some might argue that it's quite carceral. Bella, I wonder if, you know, with your criminology background, those are some of the ways that you're witnessing our economy. In terms of how resources are leveraged, I'm sure you've heard that, burn and dump. You'll hear our politicians talk about those things. And then finally, in terms of our purpose, the idea is, I think someone in the chat earlier mentioned accumulation. The idea is, how can a small group of people build and extract as much wealth and as much power as possible? And so I want to propose that, you know, our economy doesn't necessarily need to be managed that way, because as we discussed earlier, this management can look a ton of different ways. So shout out some adjectives. How might our economy be managed? Cooperative, absolutely.
Locally.
And that's funny, April just put that in the chat. Locally.
Creatively.
Creatively. Say more about
I
that.
think the economy, we don't really think of, you know, artistic expression or things that bring us joy as something that is like a net positive or like in the economic sense. But I think we could reshape that, because if people are happy and they express joy, they are, in a sense, willing to be more productive and do more.
Right. Yeah, so we can think back to that first image where it talks about the purpose of an economic system. If it's just wealth accumulation and extraction, it actually doesn't leave a lot of room for creativity, and creativity that's purposeful for joy, abundance, all of these things that we know to be true as humans. I'm seeing kin-based, absolutely. That term oikos that we mentioned earlier actually does loosely translate to the idea of family or household. So absolutely, I'm seeing care and honor for people in the earth, right relationship, absolutely. Sustainably, yeah, for sure. So again, our friends at Movement Generation who've kind of articulated this framework call this the living economy. You can also hear a lot of other terms like well-being economy, the solidarity economy. We can talk about those differences maybe in the Q&A, but for the purposes of our conversation, you've got cooperation at the very middle, as Jeff mentioned, deep democracy, we've got ecological and social well-being, right? So we're thinking about both people and the planet. We've got this idea of regeneration, right? So instead of extraction and kind of moving beyond our limits in terms of how we manage our collective resources, we're really thinking about sustainability. And then again, the worldview is focused on caregiving and sacredness. So I want to introduce this concept at the beginning of, okay, so we've talked about that extractive economy and we've talked about the living economy. And I want to pose the question of, you know, how do we get there? And the folks who developed this model called the just transition essentially said that there are three things we need to do, right? The first is that we need to stop the bad stuff. We need to divest, we need to reform, reroute things so that we're moving from sort of that extractive nature into something more regenerative. The second is that as we're doing that sort of hospice work, we're also doing the work of birthing, right? We're investing in the new economy, we're building the new economy. And in the middle, right, we're changing the very rules of that economy, right? So instead of thinking, well, economy can only happen as an extractive thing, it can happen in different ways. So I'm here to talk about community wealth building. And so I wanted to just introduce CWB as a tool that can help us really go through the just transition. So I know in preparation for today, y'all have read a little bit about community wealth building. So I'm curious, if you had to define it to your classmates or to a friend or to family members, what would you say? What's community wealth building?
It's like taking us beyond the notion of hyper individualistic mindset of like accumulating everything for me and my family without like thinking about the neighbors, the communities, and, and making a more cohesive and more equitable, ensuring a more equitable and equitable resource and wealth sharing patterns.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm hearing the piece around moving from individualist to a collective, maybe sharing of resources, but also that kind of mindset or cultural orientation, moving from being kind of extractive and focused on the individual to more so thinking about your neighbors and your community. Yeah, for sure. What else?
I'm thinking also in transforming the very definition of wealth from just monetary financial wealth, that's the way that has been historically understood, from something that is different, right? So something that is sustainable. I would say it's something related to a collective capacity to meet the needs of the people, not only with money, but with services, with different types of needs, right?
Yeah. So Fabian, what you're actually referring to is this idea of capital bias, where we know, particularly, as sociologists, that there's lots of different kinds of capital out there, not just financial, right? There's cultural capital, social capital, the relationships we have with one another, human capital, the capacity and resources individuals have to do the thing. And a lot of times in our current economic system, we prioritize financial capital over all other forms of capital. And so going back to this idea of changing the rules, right? What would it look like if we valued other forms of capital in similarly progressive ways? Anything else?
It's also just a decentralized approach to power. It's a bottom-up way to build wealth as opposed to just this trickle-down effects that we've been hoping that come down, but it's not, right? So this is an alternative to that.
Yeah, this piece around decentralized is actually really critical and core to the definition. So here I'm drawing from the Democracy Collaborative, which I think I saw a former colleague of mine, Sarah McKinley, online. So the Democracy Collaborative is sort of a think and do tank that coined the term community wealth building back in 2005. And they really saw it as an economic development model that transforms local economies based on communities having direct ownership and control of the key assets of our economy, right? So land, labor, and capital. So the piece that Abby just shared about community wealth building being bottom up is really kind of localized in this phrase of direct ownership and control, right? The idea is that we're decentralizing power, we're decentralizing ownership from a small few into many, and we're doing the same with control. And some of the long-term goals, as are articulated on the slide of community wealth building, are, again, economic transformation, right? We're not just tinkering at the edges of our economic system, but really trying to fundamentally shift things from the bottom up. So just to give a little bit of insight into how community wealth building actually works, is that there are 5 pillars that the Democracy Collaborative has articulated, sort of make up the foundation of community wealth building. Does anybody want to take a crack at progressive procurement? I know y'all have read about it, but just curious to know, what does that really mean? Or even if you have an example. And folks in the Zoom room are welcome to share via chat too.
Yeah, we have a lot of expertise in the chat, so please tell us about progressive procurement. Our fellows are coming off of a long seminar, so some of us are tired. We need help, please. Progressive procurement. I also saw Sarah McKinley in the chat.
Well, what does it mean to procure something? Let's start there.
To procure something,
Uh-huh.
I think of provisioning, seeking a need or a good and acquiring it.
Exactly. That is a really simple way of understanding procurement. So the idea of progressive procurement, oh, and I see my friend Gavin in the chat. So try and direct spending of an organization towards people who typically haven't had access to wealth. Absolutely. Buy, build, and hire locally is a really succinct way of talking about it. And thanks, Sarah, institutional market shaping. We'll talk about that too. So the idea of progressive procurement is that, you know, in all of our communities and neighborhoods, you've got these big social institutions like George Mason, like hospitals, institutions of higher ed, churches, that have a lot of buying power, a lot of purchasing power. They're able to procure all sorts of goods and services in a really impactful way that actually shapes a local economy. So the idea of progressive procurement is that how can we ensure that that procurement is happening in such a way that the money and the dollars that are being spent are circulating locally. So a really good sort of seminal example of this is the Cleveland Clinic. If you've heard of the Cleveland model, that was one that was sort of, you know, touted as sort of the hallmark of progressive procurement and community wealth building. And the idea was that the Cleveland Clinic was spending lots and lots of money in getting their laundry washed by a company somewhere else in the world. So not only were they like taking all their hospital's laundry and shipping it overseas to get washed and then paying for the shipment back, they were also kind of neglecting services that could have been there locally. So the Evergreen Cooperative Laundry was founded as a cooperative enterprise that hired both returning citizens and other folks who were local to the community to essentially meet that need. And so what Sarah said in the chat earlier of, you know, you're shaping sort of a protected market that allows for cooperative businesses, for example, to really be competitive enough to really thrive and grow. So that's the first one. Okay, what about locally rooted finance? How does that compare to finance today? Is finance locally rooted today? No?
Yeah.
Yes? How is it not locally rooted today?
I think about like my Wells Fargo money, and it's probably being invested in like things I don't want it invested in, but I can't really help that for the most part.
Yeah.
Or I guess I could, because they are credit unions that are available, but a lot of people can't really access that because credit unions are so small. But you know, big banks like Wells Fargo, Bank of America, they're constantly investing all of our money in to fund genocides, for weapons, and we don't really have control over that.
Absolutely. Yeah, so a lot of the banks where we store our potentially income and other assets, right, our wealth, are not necessarily using that and reinvesting it in our local economy. In fact, it's likely that money is funding things that many of us probably don't agree with, and it's happening on this kind of multinational or global scale. So locally rooted finance is essentially like, all right, how can we take our financial system, which is sort of the lifeblood of our economy, and really bring it back home, whether that's through credit unions or public banks or community investment vehicles. And we'll talk about those in just a second too. Okay, next we've got inclusive and democratic enterprise. Oh, I see some public banking fans, local taxes. Yeah, inclusive and democratic enterprise. What does that mean?
Enterprises, so like businesses?
Yep, exactly.
So like grocery co-ops, is that what you?
Yeah, that's a great example. Yeah, so a cooperative business, right, is changing the rules of how business typically operates, right? Is that you've got a few people who own the business at the very top, shareholders, And they're essentially doing all that they can to cut their costs so that when they make profits, that money goes directly to the few people who are owners. Whereas in a cooperative business, the whole kind of fundamental mechanism is inverted where everybody is an owner. And not only that, they also have a stake in the governance and decision making of a particular business, right? The whole one member, one vote idea. Exactly. Okay, for the sake of time, I'm going to move us along. So fair work is probably the most self-explanatory. The idea is that labor should be something that's accessible to folks, it's dignified, and folks are making livable wages. And then last, but certainly not least, we've got just use of land and property. And here, you know, this is probably one of the most neglected pillars of community wealth building, at least in the United States, at scale, because we often forget that land is a really critical economic asset. And for many years, right, the land in the United States has been extracted from communities, particularly indigenous communities, and privatized and enclosed to really service the needs of a particular few. So the idea of just use of land and property is how do we, again, democratize that so it's accessible for all folks. And this graphic here represents the community wealth building wedge, which essentially says that when you're using and deploying all of these 5 pillars together in your own kind of economic development efforts, you're kind of driving a wedge into the extractive economy and transforming it from the inside out, from the local into the global. Okay. So if there's anything that you take away from today's conversation, is that there are really 2 things, fundamentally, 2 principles that really govern community wealth building. And the way I think about them is, you know, through this idea of economic democracy. Haha, I work for the Center for Economic Democracy. And the idea really is within economic democracy of who is owning something, right? So ownership. And who is making decisions about it, governance. So community wealth building is really a model that helps, or a tool that helps us move towards this vision of economic democracy. So when Eleanor reached out to me about doing this talk, we need to get rid of all the political parties. All right, Dave, I want to hear about that during the Q&A. When Eleanor first reached out to me, she asked, you know, I really want you to help students understand how can CWB help us to address some of the challenges we're facing right now. And it's a great question. And what I did was, you know, we've heard so much about the affordability crisis that's really challenging us all as Americans today and around the world. And so I picked 3 things that most Americans say are super expensive. The first is housing and energy costs. Those have been rising steadily, while wages have not since the 70s. The second is food. And the third is transportation. So of the people in this room and also in the Zoom room, how many of you have struggled to pay your rent, afford your mortgage, get healthy food from the grocery store, or afford a car? Just a show of hands or maybe an emoji in the chat. Okay, so we've got everyone in the room. Let's see, anyone else in the Zoom? Okay, we've got some folks.
If you don't raise your hand, we're coming after you for donations.
Oh, look at all those hands.
Yeah,
All right, there you go. Not exactly, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, breaking even, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So what I want to do just as an exercise, right, is I've shown you all of these things about community wealth building and it sounds so awesome, but let's really localize it into the challenges that we're really facing. So when we're thinking about housing and energy, if you were to apply either the principles of community wealth building or this idea of economic democracy, what would housing and energy really look like as a sector? Yeah.
Yeah.
Say more.
So 60% of all the people in Vienna live in housing that's owned by the city of Vienna. All, well, I mean, and it's been that way for over 100 years.
Yeah.
So it's a model that overwhelmingly works. I mean, the municipalities have a lot more power. So that's why the model would be hard to replicate here, because municipalities have no power. So, you need to basically municipalize the land.
Right.
It's hard for us to do that.
Right. So what Jeff is bringing up, right, is like the owner of the land is not private, it's public in Austria. And the idea is that local governments or municipalities are the owners. And because in an ideal world, local governments are not driven by profit in the same way that private owners might be or private developers, chances are the housing is much more affordable. It is. And two, folks have access to it, right, in ways that they might not here in the US. Okay, we've got subsidized housing, absolutely. That's a great example of how municipalities here in the US can really support access to housing. Other thoughts, other ideas? I know we've got lots of people doing this work in the chat, so please let us know.
I can think of some progressive procurement possibilities for energy.
Okay.
And a big institution like George Mason and this Fuse building, drawing on local energy producers to power our classrooms.
Yeah, absolutely, right? So right now, who is owning and making decisions about energy, whether that's electricity, gas, water, and other kind of utility bills that we all pay? And what would it look like for that to be relegated to either citizens themselves, right? Community-owned power grids are getting more and more traction, or an institution like George Mason or another one that's public, where again, we can drive down the costs and really ensure that folks are able to access their needs. So here I just want to present a couple of different ways in which we really are moving towards a more community wealth building approach to the housing and energy sector, right? So we've got community land trusts, permanent real estate and housing cooperatives. I see April's talking about those in the chat. Rent control, microgrids, municipal broadband. So these are, again, just a smattering of examples of how can we really address the housing and energy crisis by using the tool of community wealth building and the principles of economic democracy. Let's get a couple of shout outs for food. What might food look like if we were thinking about it from a community wealth building approach? Locally grown, absolutely.
I would think it would be more like essentially like farm to table. There would be no middleman like a giant grocery store. We would be sourcing our food directly from farmers to the markets.
Totally, yeah. One of the big projects that CED is working on with our co-op coalition is supply chain reform, right? So by the time the tomato that you're putting in your salad reaches your plate and your bowl, it's actually gone through so many different hands, all of which have been extracting an amount of money, which is why when tomatoes are so expensive, or you can, think about eggs, which I know has been a recent crisis for a lot of folks.
I also feel like less waste, just because stores have very high standards as to what food should be, and a lot gets wasted if they don't pass specific aesthetics or size requirements, and that would kind of be gone, and it would be more profit for the farmers because they would be able to sell that to people and generally more sustainable.
Absolutely.
So there is a thing that Gavin has written on the chat box that the power of the state.
Yes.
And I think this is where the reframing of the legal architecture comes into play.
For sure.
And how we can enable the local constitutions.
Yeah.
To enable the local actors, the agencies, so that
Definitely.
the state or the federal authorities does not come and hunt you down.
Right. Right.
Like if you want, if you want to go for locally grown produce, so what are the standards that you need to set? What are the price caps that would be fair for the customers and the growers?
Right.
And yeah, I think that's very important thing to consider.
Yeah.
The balance of power through different legal mechanisms that are in play. Like in Virginia, there are only 2 or 3 power suppliers.
Right.
So it's not like a competitive market.
Right.
It's very condensed and what I should say. I'm not actually familiar with that term.
Sure. It's more like of a monopoly. There's fewer actors, and so they're able to kind of set prices, and absolutely. And that's where, you know, policy and legislation really comes in. And I almost wish Rima were still here because they could tell us about sort of the constitutionalist perspective on all of these things, particularly with what Gavin shared around state preemption. Absolutely. Okay, for the sake of time, I'm gonna move us along. So here are a few examples of how we can move towards the food sector being guided by community wealth building. So we've got regenerative agriculture, and this piece is really big. What does native land stewardship really look like? And how can that help us to move towards regenerative agriculture and have some of the farm to table stuff that Abby was speaking to earlier? And then last, but certainly not least, here are just a couple of examples for transportation, right? So, you know, free public transit is something that's been a hot topic in New York City. The drivers cooperative is a great example of rideshare that, you know, is really looking to reform some of the extractive business and work practices and labor practices of businesses like Uber and Lyft. And then also a great example in the state of Massachusetts is that there's a millionaire's tax. So, you know, thinking about progressive taxation that's being used to invest in public transit infrastructure. So again, thinking about what can states and municipalities do in the absence of federal support. So again, as I mentioned earlier, if there's anything that you're taking away from this conversation is, you know, as you're thinking about new economic models and evaluating sort of the efficacy of them, these are 2 questions that you can ask yourself to really see, is this community wealth building? Is this something moving us towards these beautiful visions of economic democracy? And those 2 questions are, who owns it and who decides? You know, we've got a little bit of time for Q&A, so I'll open it up to the room, and then we can get some questions in from Zoom. And if you want to put your questions in the chat, I can also look through those. Yeah, can we turn it over to students for a second? Any questions from the room?
So when we talk about community wealth building, are we looking, like, when you visualize it, is it like pockets of sort of communities that are working together and deciding together? Is that what the vision is, essentially?
Yeah, so, you know, it depends on who you ask. The idea of community wealth building, and, you know, it happens over a long period of time, but the idea is like, can we first just start with local and regional ecosystems that are relocalizing wealth, collectivizing ownership, and expanding kind of democratic governance? And then from there, how can we build the infrastructure that allows us to, you know, connect those local and regional efforts through more robust translocal infrastructure?
That was my
right?
question. Like,
Yeah.
how do we connect the 2? What does trade look like? And also, how do we prevent hierarchies from forming, you know, with one
Absolutely.
community having more resources or power or whatever it is?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I think those are all things that as a movement, we're still uncovering and figuring out and thinking about what does governance look like in these, you know, nation states that we're
Right.
currently living in. And something that I really appreciate about the Center for Economic Democracy is we see a lot of this work as prefigurative, right? So it's like, let's try something out, let's experiment with something, see how it goes, while simultaneously really investing in that translocal infrastructure to make sure that, you know, the stuff that's happening in Seattle isn't happening in isolation, because they're deeply connected to the stuff that's happening in Boston on the other side of the country. But you're right, some of the questions around governance, trade, exchange, kind of what Fabian had mentioned earlier, those are still questions that are up in the air, because we haven't yet reached a point where we've kind of saturated our local economies with these kind of, you know, beautiful visions of economic democracy. So TBD. Other questions in the room?
I have a question on how local initiatives that are still private, for example, small business owners that are part of the community, they share this feeling of belonging to a common, but still are, you know, like private actors that in one stage can be part of these strategies, but in one moment later or soon there is a tension between what it's my interest as a business owner and the collective that in contradiction I'm still part of. So how do you see these
manage that? That's a great question. So one of the ways that we talk about ownership, right, is that there's kind of like, again, this is to essentialize it, right? There's three kinds. There's private ownership, public ownership, as in the state, and then there's commons or collective ownership, right? So in our current economic system, if you look at the spread, I mean, a great exercise that I've had students do in the past is like, just think about your morning, okay? And think about all the goods and services you used in order to get here today. So I woke up, turned on the faucet, brushed my teeth. Who is owning the water that's coming out of my faucet? Then I, you know, needed to take a bus. Who's owning that? You know, and so on and so forth. Who's owning the, you know, I don't know, coffee shop that I went to and got whatever I wanted for breakfast, and so on and so forth. And what you'll notice is that in our current economic system, there is an overrepresentation of private ownership. And private ownership comes with its own mindsets, worldview, purposes, right? And so our job during this, you know, phenomenon of the just transition, our job is how can we really move towards collective ownership, whether that's the state, whether that's the commons, whether it's still private, but maybe it's more collective in its governance structures, like a cooperative, for example. So the idea is not to eliminate all private ownership. In fact, it's actually the opposite. It's how can we reform the idea of private ownership in a way that builds worker power, democratizes governance, and really allows everyday people to participate in the management of a particular business or firm. Do we have time for a couple of questions? I know we're at time.
I have. Yeah. We can keep going.
Okay.
Although I will invite, if our fellows have somewhere to be, you guys don't feel obligated to, you know, have to stay longer than class. I have a question about what is the status of the conversation in CWB advocates about this political, the aspect of political struggle and these, you know, these questions that come up again and again, that, you know, local municipalities don't have this competency, right, legally. You know, so many of these questions get kicked up to the state level where they die. And at the same time, there's all of this electoral dysfunction.
Right.
And we see reform efforts again and again, many, you know, that, you know, we always hope for reform, but also many end up being unsuccessful. And then, of course, this state itself is a oppressive institution. And so if the state is an oppressive institution, how does CWB see, or, you know, maybe I would say, like, again, like, I think of like, what is the status of this conversation in terms of like the best strategies for actually creating political power? And again, especially, and maybe this is like a second part to that, that our current model of what is public is extremely problematic, right? Our municipalities themselves are completely undemocratic.
Right.
So I can imagine that there's some debate or exploration about what is, what are the strategies at the political level or in the political sphere that can make these kinds of interventions possible.
Right.
It's a hard-hitting one, but I've always wanted to ask it, so.
Yeah, no, thank you for the question. And it's actually something that's been really alive and present in my own work. And I'll just share some reflections. So most recently, I was in Kenya for a conference hosted by a group called People Powered. And they consider themselves to be the global hub for participatory democracy. So I was with a ton of people from the global south who were essentially doing pro-democracy work in, frankly, much more authoritarian contexts than the one that we find ourselves slipping into. And something I left, and it was funny to be someone kind of representing or advocating for economic democracy in that space, considering the conversations. And what it made me realize is like this work is very much a constellation, right? If you don't have a state that's democratic, that can take ownership of certain resources and then really further democratic governance of said resources, then you're kind of at a loss, right? Mm-hmm. So that's one thing, right? So all of the electoral reforms that organizations are working on, both in the US and beyond, are critical in terms of building the foundation for something like actually democratic public ownership, as an example, right? The other thing I want to kind of think about is, your first question, if I'm remembering it correctly, is like, how can the state really manage some of these resources in the current, like the local and state level management of resources?
How can we, or what are the strategies that have seemed to be fruitful in clawing back power from the state level to the municipal or even the popular level?
Right. So not to put Sarah McKinley on the spot, but a couple of years ago, I want to say 2 years ago, Sarah and I wrote an article in Next City where we talked about some of these kind of, buy local, relocalize our economy efforts as really being co-opted by the right and used as a way to justify, frankly, really racist and xenophobic shit, pardon my language. And so what we were doing in this article was really trying to outline what are some ways that municipalities can demonstrate local wealth building efforts and really create the enabling conditions for those in a way that doesn't necessarily say, oh, we're doing this because we don't actually want to trade or exchange with other states or other communities, but it's really about, ensuring that our people have access to these resources and are able to, live in affordable homes or able to buy groceries and all those kinds of things. And I'll also just say, oh, thanks, April, that's helpful. I'll also just say, there are plenty of localities and states. The Democracy Collaborative runs a community of practice for practitioners who are working at the local level, who have been working with cities to really think through interventions to make community wealth building something that is integrated into the political infrastructure of a particular place, right? To varying degrees of success. But a recent example is the community wealth building ecosystem in the city of Chicago, right? Which was set up using ARPA dollars coming from the pandemic, from the federal government, that set up this ecosystem to really think about, all right, how can we train up technical assistance providers to support new worker-owned cooperatives or to support community investment vehicles or land trusts and things of the like. So there are examples out there that I think are, again, prefigurative, But it remains to be seen how we're able to kind of bring together some of these conversations around political and economic reform with, political and electoral reform with economic reform.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I want to give folks in the chat an opportunity to chime in. I saw a hand up from Pete, I think. And if others would like to jump on stack, please do. And thank you all for your patience as we set up the tech earlier and also had our Q&A here in Fairfax.
Good to see you.
Sorry, Eleanor, I came in
You
real
still have
late.
Pete?
I was in a work-related Zoom meeting, and I just came on really late. So I just want to confirm that this wonderful webinar was recorded. It's going to be sent out to everybody registered.
See, Pete, can folks hear me? Is
Can you hear me?
that right? Yeah, okay, folks can hear me.
Yeah, I can hear
I'm
you.
having a hard time hearing Pete, maybe.
Oh, are we?
Yeah, you said you
We
mentioned my
can't
name.
hear Pete, but can others hear Pete?
It's not I just want to know if the
See,
webinar.
we're having a technical issue. Just a moment, folks.
Are you on mute?
I'm unmuted. I can hear you guys.
We can hear Pete.
I can hear Pete. It's for that.
My apologies for the technical hiccup. Pete, could you talk again?
Yeah, no problem. Eleanor, pardon me, April,
We
no
still
problem,
can't
Eleanor.
hear
April
you.
just answered my
So
question.
you need to like connect up the system.
Hang on. Well, actually, Pete, you go ahead and you guys continue talking in the chat while we figure out the room, and we'll
I can unmute. over
come right
here.
back to you guys.
All
Thank
right.
you, April.
Go
April
ahead,
answered
Pete.
my question. I'm good.
April. Okay, there was a question.
Let them know that April answered my question about the meeting being recorded and sent out.
Oh,
I came in way
perfect.
late. I came
Okay,
in way
perfect.
late.
Yes, it will be
Yeah.
recorded.
Sorry,
and
I didn't
sent
get
out.
on until about 11:20. Thanks,
Awesome.
April. You rock.
Thanks.
Nice to know I'm heard by some people. But yeah, I'm looking forward to watching your.
Is there anyone else from the chat who has a question that they'd like to share or a comment? Right. In that case, oh, here's one in the chat. Ravi is asking if there's one project that you're excited about.
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, so one of the things that folks can hear me? Yeah, okay. One of the things that we're working on at the Center for Economic Democracy, and I'll shout out my colleagues, Alex Papali and Sarah Sefa, who oversee our co-op coalition in the state of Massachusetts. And what they're doing is they're working with the state to pass a piece of legislation called Opportunity to Own. And if you Google COWOP, Opportunity to Own, there's a fact sheet. But the idea there is that when a business comes up for sale, which is going to happen much more frequently in the next 15 to 20 years, as we're seeing this kind of great wealth transfer, businesses are going to come up for sale. And typically when small businesses do so, and if there's no kind of succession plan, then typically private equity comes in, buys the business, sells it for parts, everybody loses their job. Now, we know that most businesses, according to the SBA definition of being under 500 and fewer employees, are small businesses. And so the Opportunity to Own legislation says that when a business comes up for sale, can workers within that business have the first opportunity to purchase said business with the assistance of technical assistance providers and financiers locally, and convert that business into a worker-owned cooperative. Now, there's a lot of different municipalities around the country that have been fighting for similar legislation. San Francisco is a great example. And if you're interested in learning more about that kind of legislation, Policy Link has a really helpful digestible map that essentially talks about similar kind of, it's called right of first refusal, for both businesses and then also for land. And for folks who are familiar with the DC area, we also have TOPA, which is the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act. And so our opportunity to own legislation is modeled off of other TOPA policies, but it's kind of taking that idea and applying it to businesses, especially as we see this kind of great wealth transfer unfolding. So that I'm excited about that. It's a big opportunity, and I hope that we're really able to support similar efforts around the country.
All right, we've got two more in the online group, and then I think we're gonna wrap things up. We have Nelson and then Pete.
Yeah, thank you. Nairuti, I'd like to ask you a question. Do you have any projects going on in Florida at the moment through your organization? Reason for that is I am currently running for public office in Orange County, Florida, and a big part of my program is community wealth building. So I'd be very excited to get any more information about how I may be able to present it in the community, because I think one of the reasons we're losing our political democracy is because we're not balancing it with an economic democracy. It's like the two wings of one bird, and we have failed to really keep up the economic democracy. And I think we need to lift that up in order to have a bird that flies as it's supposed to.
Yeah.
So anyway, if you have, or if you can put your contact, oh, you did put your contact. I'd like to get in touch with you because I really like to spearhead this stuff. I'm very familiar with Gar Alperviz's work. In fact, I brought him to Orlando for one of our film festivals to talk about all this stuff. So, but I'm just a beginner, and I need to learn more, and just insights that you guys might be able to share. I would be really, really grateful.
Yeah, that is a great question. So CED at the current moment, most of our local campaigns and coalitions are in Boston, Massachusetts, and the Northeast. But we are, working to do work in other places. What I'll say for now is I've got several people in Florida that I can put you in touch with. One of my colleagues at the State Innovation Exchange, Ida Escamani, her sister is actually in the State House. You might be familiar with her.
Ida's a good friend of mine.
Okay. I think I missed what you just said.
Anna's a good friend of mine. And she is running for the mayor of Orlando right now. She's leaving Yes.
Yeah, that's great. So I feel like she would be a really good resource. Thank you so much for joining. The Miami Workers Center, for example, has recently advanced a lot of really great work in the labor space and sector. There's a huge fight against data centers in the state of Florida, so lots of local organizers that I can put you in touch with. And there's also somebody, Omar Ocampo, who works for the Institute for Policy Studies. They've launched several different projects in the state of Florida that I'm happy to put you in touch with. But for the sake of time, I put my email in the chat. Please reach out, and happy to schedule time to connect. And kudos for running for public office. We definitely need more values aligned folks who are doing that work. So thank you.
Thank you.
Pete?
Yeah, thank you. You answered my question by putting your email in the chat. Thank you. I want to follow up. in my spare time, I work with the Romero Institute here in Santa Cruz, California. We're working on a progressive policy document for the 2026 and 2028 elections, and we're looking for subject matter experts to give us some input. So I'm going to send you an email this afternoon, the Pacific time, and see if we can connect and have a chat. If that's okay.
Yeah, that sounds great. Happy to correspond via email.
Thank you. Thank you. Very kind of you. Yeah, I want to set up like a phone conversation, just give you an overview of what we're doing and see if you're interested in giving us any input. It would be wonderful.
Yeah, sounds like a plan. Thanks.
Thank you. And I really look forward to hearing everything you had to say, because I missed most of the webinar, but we just got a good new contract from the Department of Energy, and they're explaining everything, so I had to attend. So
yeah, for sure. Great. That's awesome.
Thank you. You rock. Thank you, Eleanor.
You're welcome, and thank you so much.
I got it. Go ahead.
You're welcome, and thank you so much, Pete, and thank you everyone who joined us here this afternoon to talk about community wealth building. This is our last Next System speaker for the semester, but this is our 4th year doing this series, so be on the lookout for future Next System speaker events. This year, we've just been really blown away by the number of people who've been moved to join us, and also the quality of the people who've been joining us. Like, this chat is such a gold mine of resources and cutting edge thinking. And it's really a privilege to be in this community with you all. So thank you very much. Be sure to follow up with us at Next System Studies. We'll be in touch, and be sure to follow up with Nairuti's work at the Center for Economic Democracy. And let's give a round of applause for Nairuti.
Thanks, everyone.